Hi guys, welcome back to Elevate Legal. Hope you've been getting heaps out of it so far. Thought I'd start with a bit of an introduction. My name's Raul. I'm currently studying a double degree in Law and Commerce at the University of New South Wales, and I've been part of the team that's been bringing you the Legal Studies series so far. So today what I'm going to have a look at is going about how to answer multiple choice questions, which we hear from a lot of students are often the area they lose the most marks. Now, the primary reason we see this happening is because all the other sections in the legal studies paper are expected. That is to say that you know what the topic of each of them is going to be, and therefore you know how to study for them. The other thing that tends to happen is that because you get short answer and longer response questions, you can use a wider variety of material to answer those questions. Whereas obviously multiple choice questions are very specific and require you to know exactly the correct answer. So today I'm going to go through a couple of easy to use techniques to make your life a whole lot easier when answering those multi-choice questions. To finish off, we'll also have a look at some of the questions from last year's HSC paper, and I'm going to give you another resource that'll let you practice multiple choice without buying anything or needing to go through each paper individually. So the very first technique I want to share with you is about time management. Now, they're probably two words that you hate hearing in the same sentence, and you've probably heard them over and over again. But one of the reasons they're particularly critical in relation to multiple choice is because when used correctly, multi-choice questions can really be the biggest blessing in your HSC paper, or in your legal studies paper, wherever you're sitting it for that matter. So if you manage your time correctly, if you can build up some confidence, you'll find that you can do 5 to 10 multiple choice questions in your reading time and quickly knock off the rest when the exam starts. Now, obviously you can't write your answers in the reading time, but it's fairly easy to remember 5 to 10 letters, or at least when you look at them again when the exam starts, you remember what you thought the answer was. So by ignoring the rest of the paper, which is going to be there when you get to it anyway, and using your reading time in this fashion, you can reduce a lot of stress and you can knock off those easy multiple choice questions that you just know the answer to when you look at them, which will give yourself more time not only to do the harder multiple choice questions, but also spend more time on the rest of the paper, which is obviously going to get you more marks. The second technique that I want to share with you specifically to do with multiple choice questions is to use the rule of 2. Now, the rule of 2 pretty much means that in a typical multiple choice question with 4 options to choose from, 2 of those options are usually nonsense, and 2 are very similar and hard to choose from. So unless you get a question where the answer sort of immediately jumps out at you, my best advice is to first eliminate the two answers that you think are nonsense. This way, even if you have to take a guess, you're increasing your chances from 25% to 50%, which is a huge difference. That means that if you guessed all the questions in the paper, you would have, on average, you'd get twice as many right using this approach. Now remember, if you don't know the answer to the question, it's always better to make an educated guess rather than leaving the question blank or just randomly putting down an answer. Right, so let's get on and have a look at how this applies to a few real questions from last year's paper. Alright guys, so the first 2 questions I want to have a look at really cement this idea of ruling out 2 options, and they're a very popular type of question in multiple choice in legal studies. So this is questions 2 and 3 from the 2015 HSC paper if you want to follow along. Question 2, we'll get started, says, which of the following best describes criminal law in New South Wales? And it's got 4 options there, and pretty much of the 4 options, there's 4 answers to choose from. Now, that sounds a bit stupid, but what I mean by that is that there's 2 answers that have public law, and 2 answers that have private law, 2 answers that have the adversary system, and 2 answers that have the inquisitorial system. So there's 4 bits of information, and we need to decide which 2 pieces of information are correct. So the easiest way to do this is to start with any information that you know or that you know is incorrect. So, for example, you've got 2 real ways of doing this. You could know that in New South Wales, in the criminal law division, that's considered public law, and therefore you could automatically rule out answers C and D. Or you could know that in New South Wales, in fact in Australia, for most of our courts, except for the coroner's court, we use the adversary system, which means that there's 2 parties opposing each other, and the judge is a separate external decider and onlooker. So depending on which information you know, let's say that you know we have an adversary system, and if you know that we have an adversary system, you can of course rule out the inquisitorial option. So you can rule out option B, and you can rule out option D, which leaves you with C and A, and you now have to decide between public and private law. So thinking about criminal law, you should have a basic understanding that criminal law is between one person, the wrongdoer, or the accused wrongdoer rather, and the state. And the reason it's the state is because criminal law is the state punishing someone on behalf of society, on behalf of the public. Whereas private law tends to be something distinctly between two individuals that doesn't usually affect the wider public, wider society. So based on just looking at the words public and private, you can make an educated guess that it's not private and therefore it has to be public. And that is the right answer. Question 2, the answer was A. Moving on to question 3, it's a very similar approach. Question 3 says, Michael travels by public transport to his office in the city. He's been caught traveling without a valid ticket. What types of offences have been committed by Michael? So again, here you have to decide between summary and white-collar offences, public order and strict liability offences. So thinking about where we'd start, if I looked at this question, I personally would be more hesitant to decide between summary and white-collar. And whereas looking at public order and strict liability and thinking about the offence, I'm thinking, well, travelling on the train without a ticket doesn't really disturb public order. So I'm feeling pretty confident about ruling out the public order offences. And feeling pretty confident that it has to be a strict liability offence because it's one of those offences where if you get caught and you don't have a ticket, that's it, you're gone. There's no defence to that sort of offence. It's like drink driving. If you get caught with alcohol in your system while you're driving, you have committed the offence. There is no way to get out of it. It's strict liability. Simply by being caught, you are then guilty. Same sort of situation here. So then I've got to decide between a summary offence and a white-collar offence. Now, in my mind, I know that a white-collar offence, and I picture the white-collar offence as, the really rich bankers committing fraud, committing economic offences, stealing heaps of money, sort of a bigger offence. And a summary offence is typically a smaller offence that goes to court. And looking at the type of crime, Michael hasn't really stolen any money from anyone. He hasn't really committed a larger type of economic offence. So I'm probably going to rule out option D. And having a look at the answers, question 3, the answer was B. So that's a really good start. Okay, so let's get on with another question. This is question 15 from the same paper, the 2015 HSC paper. I picked this question because I think it's a really good overlap between the human rights and criminal law sections. And just in case you aren't already aware, your multiple choice questions, at least in the HSC, only come from human rights and criminal law. You get 15 on criminal law, 5 on human rights. So this question, we can use the same approach even though it covers a variety of different topics. So let's have a look. It says, which of the following involves both a human rights issue and a criminal law issue in Australia? A woman demands equal pay. B, a refugee is arrested for assault. C, a child is forced to work in a factory. And D, a same-sex couple is denied the right to marry. Now, looking at those 4 options, just starting from the top, a woman demands equal pay. I can see how that would tick the box of a human rights issue because it obviously involves equal rights for everyone and equality between people, but I can't really see how it ticks the box of a criminal law issue. And again, it's useful to have the definitions of these things in your mind. A criminal law issue typically is an act or omission that breaks the criminal law. And there's, as far as I'm aware, no criminal law that says you can't pay people different amounts. There's obviously anti-discrimination laws, but there's no law that you're sort of directly taught about in the course that relates to option A. So they would have no problems in pretty quickly getting rid of option A. Bit of a wonky line there, that's all right. Going on to option B, a refugee is arrested for assault. Now, looking at that option, I'm willing to bet that 99% of HSC students would have put down B because it ticks the box of a refugee and you've got the option for arrested for assault. But thinking about that, while assault is a criminal law issue, the fact that assault was committed by a refugee has no real implication in terms of a human rights perspective. Whether the perpetrator is a refugee or not, doesn't matter. Assault is purely a criminal issue, so it doesn't actually have a human rights issue. If that option said a refugee is falsely arrested for assault on the basis that they are a refugee, then perhaps that would be a human rights issue and perhaps also a criminal issue if that arrest is illegal. So on that basis, I'm also going to rule out option B. Option C says a child is forced to work in a factory. Now, for me, this ticks all the boxes just straight away. First of all, it's got child. Now, child, the key word, brings up to me the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It means it's definitely a human rights issue, protecting the rights of a child. And it's definitely a criminal law issue because it's forced labour. And we know that forced labour is definitely an illegal thing here and in many other countries around the world. So I'm going to leave option C for a moment. Option D, a same-sex couple is denied the right to marry. Now, in Australia at the moment, the law, and certainly when this paper was sat, the law is that marriage is between a man and a woman, which means that denying a same-sex couple the right to marry is legal by the government, which means that it's not a criminal law issue. So straight away, that option goes. And without really knowing definitively that C is the right answer, by just eliminating the rest, we've got to the correct answer. Just a little side note here as well, in terms of that option D, it's interesting, and one of the pieces of advice that will really help you with multiple choice and with your paper in general is that legal studies people who set the exam tend to really love to put in topical questions. So when this exam was written in 2015, obviously there was a worldwide debate about same-sex couples internationally and in Australia. There was a lot of pressure on the government, and it's really no surprise that that has come up in these questions. So one of my sort of pieces of advice, not just specifically for multiple choice, but across the board, is to be on top of sort of major news events, major discussions that are happening in the world that relate to legal issues. Anyway, we'll press right on to the next and last question that I want to have a look at. All right, so this is question 20, the final multiple choice question in this paper. And I picked this question because it is a good example of a question that you look at and go, that's difficult, just by looking at it. There's a lot of text up top, and all four options down the bottom are very different. So it's one of those questions where people tend to say, well, does this approach still work? And I want to walk you through it and show you that hopefully it does. So the question says, legislation has been changed to require mandatory imprisonment for a particular offence. Again, just to hark back to what I just said, in 2015, obviously they were introducing the one-punch laws. There was a lot of debate about that in 2014 and 15. So it's, again, no surprise that this sort of question has come up. It says, Ken commits this offence and it is recorded on CCTV. It is his first offence. Ken is convicted and is awaiting sentencing. A community group expresses concern about this law. What action should the community group take to best help Ken? So there's a lot of sort of information there. There's information that's there to help you. There's information that's there to throw you off. So the best thing to do straight away is to read all the answers. A, argue the law is unconstitutional. B, provide references for Ken's good character. C, lobby Parliament to repeal the law. Or D, advise Ken to deny the actus reus and mens rea of the offence. Now, looking at those four options and just reading them out loud, the very first thing that sort of came to mind was that provide references for Ken's good character is pretty much going to be useless. Even if they do that, it's said quite clearly that this is a mandatory imprisonment. So regardless of if Ken is a good person, a very good character, is not going to help him. So it's pretty easy to get rid of option B from the get-go. So then you've got three options that are a little bit more tricky. The piece of information that says there, this is his first offence, I think that's really designed to trap you and to push you into selecting an option like B. It's a bit of information that when there's mandatory sentencing doesn't really impact your decision. So that's the piece of information that I would ignore. However, it does say that Ken's offence has been recorded on CCTV, and this is a very important piece of information because this rules out option D. Option D says, advise Ken to deny the actus rea and mens rea of the offence. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this answer is incorrect. The first and most obvious one is that you can't deny the actus reus, which is the act being done, because it's been recorded on CCTV. So we can quickly kill option D as well. Now, again, we've got it down to a 50-50 guess. So even if we have no idea if we can argue that the law is unconstitutional or if we can lobby Parliament, we've got ourselves into a really good position. But just looking a bit further, the fact that legislation has been changed typically, and I'm not saying that this is always the case, but typically indicates that the law is constitutional. And requiring, and certainly in the case of requiring mandatory imprisonment, that is a constitutional thing to do. It would be unconstitutional if it was mandatory imprisonment if you're this type of person. That would obviously be very bad. But again, we know that things like one-punch laws and other types of things, certainly in New South Wales, have been enacted, and those pieces of legislation are perfectly within the rights of government. Even just looking at the other option, from the perspective of a community group, it's very difficult for them to argue that the law is unconstitutional. It's quite easy for them to lobby Parliament to change the law, and that's certainly something that would get Ken out of his predicament. So again here, I'm not going to definitively rule out A, but I'm certainly going to favour option C, and that's what we put down. And if I just have a quick check, Yep, it is in fact option C that was the correct answer. So there you go. That's a really different type of question to the ones we've covered. It was a question that was answered particularly poorly last year when they sat the paper, which is one of the reasons I chose to cover it. But again, you can see that just by being logical, going through and selecting the information in the question, it's pretty easy to get yourself into a good position to answer those questions. The very last thing I want to show you guys is possibly the best resource for getting all of these techniques and under your belt and practicing multiple choice. And it is practicing that's going to make this really, really useful for you. All I did was I Googled Legal Studies HSC multiple choice, and the first option here is a resource created by the Board of Studies, which is obviously a reputable source. And what this lets you do is select a set of examination papers for a particular subject, in this case legal, select the number of questions you want, so in this case 5, and what it will do is it will pick 5 random questions from those papers. It will give you a time limit that's appropriate to those questions, so in this case 5 questions in 3 minutes and 45 seconds, and you can then begin the test, and it will give you immediate feedback on your answers. Now, what this means is that after doing so many of these questions, if I go back for a second, what I used to do was select all the papers, select a ridiculous number like 40 or 50, sit there and just do them as quickly as I can, using this approach of ruling out answers. And what I quickly realized began to happen is that very similar questions came up. And that doesn't mean that it was the same question with the same answers, but it meant that I was recognizing parts of questions, I was recognizing parts of answers as well. So I knew whether answers were going to be right or wrong for certain types of questions straight away. And that really became beneficial getting into exams. It let me build up confidence. It let me do those multiple choice questions quickly in the reading time. And that gave me a head start for the rest of the exam. So as I'm sure you've heard already, practice does make perfect. And this is a really easy, free way to practice multiple choice. So I strongly recommend you give it a go. So that's it for today, guys. I really hope you got something out of it and that you'll actually go away and try and apply a couple of these techniques and see how easy they are to make them work for you. I'll be doing a couple of other expansion videos for the series, so head on over and check those out. And as always, if you've got any other questions, post them up here or on the Elevate website, and the team will definitely try and get back to you as soon as we can. Until next time, good luck, guys.